Really quick, Spencer, English is a second language for me too. Uh, your last name, Kobren, right? Is
That's
that how you
correct.
pronounce it?
Yeah,
Okay, perfect.
perfect.
Toughest part of the interview, man, just getting people's names right oftentimes.
Well, if English is your second language, you're doing pretty well, brother.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, guys, so welcome back to the show. I have a great guest today, Spencer Kobren. So, Spencer, I know we just met recently, but I've been following your work online for quite a while. And I guess it's been honestly like 6 years probably at this point since I wrote like the anti-factory farm shopping guide.
Yeah.
And for me, my journey started with I just wanted healthy eggs in America because I kind of grew up on an off-grid farm in Ukraine with my grandmother, and I'm just like I just wanted similar eggs here, and I thought it would be an easy thing to request, like I just want healthy eggs, but it turned into a very long 4 to 5 year study on just trying to get around all of the greenwashing, the labeling deception, especially in the supplement industry, and figuring out, how much, marketing deception is there. So even when a person's intention is to make the right purchase, it's oftentimes very difficult to go about doing so. And I've also seen this pattern in many industries, the business industry, like business mentoring, and also kind of like an area you're an expert in, and that's the hair loss industry. So it obviously
Right.
affects quite a bit of men, and it's important topic for them. And I just wanted to get you on the show to kind of cover some pitfalls and some things a person can look for to not waste a lot of time and money and be guided more in the right direction.
Okay.
So we can go whichever way you like. I do have like a few general questions I found
Well,
online.
well, here's the
Yeah.
thing, and I think it's important that your listeners know this. First of all, most men are going to deal with hair loss at some point in their lives. Two-thirds of men by the age of 35 will suffer with some degree of noticeable hair loss. The process will start. About 40% of hair loss sufferers are women. And that is a really kind of a silent epidemic, a really underserved market as far as honest, ethical physicians and real treatments for women. Uh, both men and women, excuse me, are being completely ripped off by this industry. 99% of all products and services being sold that people see on their feeds now. And back in my day, back in on infomercials and the back of magazines and stuff, complete nonsense. Will not help you with your hair loss. Things have just been scaled now because of social media.
Mhm.
So most of what people are buying, you know, it's not only a waste of money, it's a waste of their precious time because early intervention is key if you really want to stop or slow the progression of your hair loss. And there are methods and medications that can do that. But, there's so much, and I hate to use the word misinformation, but there's just so much nonsense that's being sold and then propagated online and regurgitated by influencers and regurgitated by, people who are either selling products or services or who just they think they're doing good for people by providing whatever alternatives to real medications that we know work, or they are making claims that all hair transplant surgery is created equal, and they kind of liken it to getting a nose job or a chin implant or something that most people, when they're thinking of cosmetic surgery, they can understand because these are procedures that have been around for a long time. But as far as hair transplant surgery is concerned, you're dealing with a moving target. Uh, Hair transplant surgery, there's really no real specialty or training in the field. A lot of doctors who get involved really are just doing it because it's a cash business. They think it's easy, but it's really one of the most nuanced, difficult forms of hair transplants we see. And, you know, kids aren't only being ripped off now in the market, but they're being disfigured en masse. We're talking about millions of guys, 1.5 million men and women, I think last year, maybe more, have gone overseas to have hair transplant surgery, thinking they're going to fix their hair loss when that's not what hair transplant surgery does. And even if you are a good candidate, I mean, it's something that has to be incredibly nuanced. It's a lifelong commitment. It takes multiple surgeries. You have to be on medication, and none of that's being told to consumers. So while what you do is, I mean, it's incredible. And I think that here in the States and other places in the West, but especially here in the States, we're being poisoned by our food supply. Um,
Mhm.
what's happening in the world of cosmetic surgery and in hair transplant surgery is devastating. And also, like I said, I know I'm speaking a lot because that's what I do for a living, or I did for a long time. Um, but what people don't fully grasp is when they see these things on their feed, whether it's some product or service or just a hair transplant, trust me, if these products and services worked really well, and these are just all kind of resold products that were sold 20 or 30 years ago, your fathers wouldn't be bald. Your mothers wouldn't be dealing with hair loss. This would have been over 40 or 50 years ago.
Hmm.
And that's just not the case. So I know that was long-winded, the explanation of what I do, but the truth of the matter is it's devastating for people out there. And every day there's about 200,000 of us, or I don't know if you're losing your hair, you don't look like you are, but waking up every day dealing with hair loss, going online, and they're easy prey.
Hmm. Well, can you go over like the different, I honestly don't even know all of the procedures, but the different types of hair transplants available and kind of what's best for certain people and what's best for others. Like I know one of my friends recently, and he's recently had it, but he had follicular unit
Extraction.
extraction. And
Right.
honestly, it looks really good at him. I know it's very recent, and sometimes I've heard people could get a hair transplant, but then it like falls out like a few years later or something of that sort. It looked really good at him, and he said he didn't have a scar or anything of that sort. And
How long ago did he have it done?
I think like about a year ago so far. So it is pretty recent, I would say.
And did he go outside of the States?
He had it done in Argentina.
Okay. I mean, listen, first let me make it clear, there are great clinics and surgeons all over the world, but there's maybe 100 reasonable clinics that really have a full-time staff, that have hair transplant surgeons that really know what they're doing, that are caring, ethical, they make great patient selection. They understand that they have to educate patients about the entire scope and all the possible pitfalls. Yet there are thousands of clinics out there. So it's
Mhm.
very difficult for someone to navigate. Um, as far as FUE hair transplant surgery, you know, it is being sold as though it's some sort of a cutting edge technique, when in fact, it's been around for well over 2 decades. And at the risk of sounding obnoxious, I've been doing this for so long that, you know, as a consumer advocate and educator back in the day through my books, and I was on the radio here in the US nationally, anyone who is coming up with a new product or service or trying to invent a new technique, they would contact me. It was very difficult for them to go through the typical um, trade routes or medical routes that you would think they should be able to, like, share their techniques, share their science, and physicians would be interested. This is a business, and these doctors were not interested in learning about FUE. So long story short, a guy by the name of Ray Woods was doing something in Australia called the Woods technique, where he was utilizing very small punches to remove grafts, single follicular units one by one, instead of creating a linear scar in the back, taking out a strip of tissue and suturing that, which is really is still to this day is state of the art, but people don't want to talk about that. They don't understand how things work. Anyway, so when he contacted me, I said that I would listen. I took the concept to a few surgeons, and they all said that it couldn't be done. I thought it was a great ancillary procedure for those who have already been disfigured or stripped out, had really bad linear scars. They couldn't get any more hair out of them. They were kids who had surgeries very early on in their lives, so they continued to progress. Um, so again, long story short, finally some doctors decided to pick it up. They called it FUE hair transplant surgery, but a lot of these guys are marketing guys. Instead of letting consumers know that this is more of an ancillary procedure and it's not one size fits all, it has been marketed as a scarless procedure, and now it's become the standard of care in the industry. Now, why is that a bad thing? Well, when you have a hair transplant, you basically have a finite amount of relatively DHT resistant hair that can be moved. And it usually is about a 3-inch area in the occipital region that kind of goes up towards and narrows out towards the temporal points of your scalp, just about maybe 2 millimeters beyond the trachea of your ear. Um, So I know that your viewers can't see me, but I basically have to hear. That's about as far as it goes in a thin strip,
Hmm.
and then it widens out. The reason hair transplant surgery works is because of the theory of donor dominance. And in that theory, Dr. Norman Orentreich realized in his early studies that for whatever reason, most balding guys will have that relatively thin donor wreath, even with extensive balding. That hair will remain to some degree. And once that hair is put into recipient site, it kind of takes on the characteristics of where it was removed from. So, with that said, you can't remove 100% of your DHT resistant hair using FUE because otherwise you would make the entire back of the scalp barren. So when they take out a strip, they can remove 100% of that DHT resistant hair, suture that skin together, the hair bearing skin together, dissect those grafts three-dimensionally under a microscope, implant those grafts into the front and the balding areas of the scalp. And for most people, most of those grafts will continue to grow for decades, and even without taking medication.
Hmm.
When it comes to FUE, in order to get those numbers of graphs, they have to go above, below, and off to the sides of DHT resistant hair. And that does two things. One, you're essentially moving pretty fragile hair that's already probably miniaturizing to some degree into the balding areas. And unless you are on medication with a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor as basically the foundation of your medical therapy, those hairs will almost 100% miniaturize, just like the hair that you already lost. It may take 2 years, it may take 3 years, but when someone gets a large FUE session at a young age, they will almost 100% be in a much worse position within a 5-year period. And again, long explanation,
Yeah.
but you can't just say what's the best procedure, what's the worst procedure, who's a good candidate, there's a lot of nuance to it. So I think that's really kind of an important aspect for young guys, especially to understand about today's hair transplant market. Now, I'm all for FUE surgery. Again, I introduced it to the US and to Europe. I really promoted it. But, you know, in order to get the most bang for your buck, so to speak, for a hair transplant, if you start balding at a young age, you're going to progress to a significant baldness. The only way to have a long-lasting hair transplant is to have that linear scar, is to take that DHT resistant hair as much as you can and move it, and then go in and cherry pick FUE so that you can get really the most resistant hair for the longest period of time. And everyone's being sold scarless surgery. It's not really scarless anyway because you see the punctate wounds in the back,
Hmm.
but they're being sold as scarless dream, but they're not being told that it's probably going to be short term in the end.
Got it. So ideally, what a person would have, and I don't know what they're called, but the scar surgery and then touch-ups with um, FUE like throughout the years, depending on what
Yeah,
they kind of the degree of continued
they
balding they may have, right?
something like that. I mean, it's called follicular unit transplantation or strip surgery, and depending on the person, their genetics, their family history, a hybrid procedure is usually going to be the best long-term result uh, or option for most men. Some guys are gun shy, I understand it, so they may want to go in for FUE first and let the physician move as many FUE grafts as they can without causing any donor depletion, and then go in with a strip. But really, the best option is to have the strip first, because every time you take out those grafts, you're creating tiny microscars. So that could affect the adjacent hairs that might not have been affected if they were removed initially through strip. And again, all nuances no one wants to tell you. It's not
Hmm.
something you're going to see from these big influencers, even some of the really big guys who are doing hair transplants that have gotten like 1 million followers on um, on YouTube and seem like really nice guys. They're not telling you this stuff because their
Hmm.
bottom line is they may be making some money on YouTube, but their bottom line is surgery. That's how they make a living.
Yeah. And I really like how you mentioned no absolutes, which is a big message I always constantly promote and tell people. It's like everyone's going to be different, what procedure they need. And on top of that, it's kind of tough because even if a person is credible online, which is fairly rare, they never met like the applicant personally. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So the only thing that could be done is just a thorough assessment with that person to give them a comprehensive answer on what needs to be done, and presuming the ethics are there with the practitioner and all that, et cetera, et cetera. So I really appreciate that you mentioned, hey, no absolutes. It all depends from patient to patient, and this isn't like a one stop fits all kind of thing. So
And yeah, and it's a unique cosmetic surgery. You have to think about you're essentially moving thousands of living organs. These are mini organ transplants, essentially. Every step of the surgery has to be on point. That means once the hair is removed, it has to be on point. Holding solutions have to be on point. Temperature has to be on point to keep those grafts alive. There are people who are in, staff members who some guys are just hiring per diem techs that are flying in. We call it the hangover effect. We have no idea what these girls are doing the night before. Their, you know, their prior actions, their moods, their technical skills dictate the results of your surgery.
mm,
No one's told this. So it's a lot different than going in and having, again, chin implant or a rhinoplasty. You're dealing with a surgery where you're essentially moving something, let me put it this way. In general, I know women's breasts will change over time, but in general, they're not worried about their breasts really just, continuing to shrink over time. So they put in implants and they may have to rotate them out, but for the most part, it's a pretty stagnant situation. But when it comes to hair loss, it's constantly progressing, even if you're on medication. So if things aren't really thought out and planned out well, these 30-year-old guys or 25-year-old guys that are getting hair transplants today, they're finished. They will not be my age. I don't know. You look pretty young. So what
I'm
do you have?
40 already, man.
Oh, you're 40. You look great. I thought you were
Oh,
like
thank you.
like 32 or something.
No, I'm up there.
Yeah. No, you look great. I'm almost 60. So I've been around for a long time. I've been doing this for a long time. And so I've seen all the fails. I've seen the long-term results. And just to give full disclosure, I founded the International Alliance of Hair Restoration Surgeons, which is really the first hair transplant society or organization that had standards and that actually, the physicians had to have a minimal caseload to even apply. And we've had over 3,000 applicants in 23 years. I've accepted maybe 80 total. Some have died already. Some have been removed. Um, I would love to grow the organization. I mean, who doesn't want a huge organization where physicians are paying their dues every year? But most doctors really suck at this, and most patients are being sold a bill of goods. So my doctors have to understand that I'm going to be talking to people like you and doing my program and going online now. I kind of came out of retirement this year to do more stuff online. That's probably how you found me, I guess, because I wasn't really that active before until this year. Um, but they have to be okay with me saying surgery is the last resort. And even these group of doctors who are the best in the world could F you up
Mhm.
because it's cosmetic surgery. Anything can happen.
Yeah. Do you know like when is a good time to consider hair loss surgery? Is it like when all of the hair loss has been complete and you kind of make that assumption like, hey, I'm not going to lose any more hair. This is the final stage, or do you try to do it? Which stage is it best to consider taking action, or is it possible to? Is there anything out today that can stop you from maybe not regrowing your hair, but stop you from losing more hair?
Yeah. I mean, so those are both good, very good questions. And look, ideally, a man doesn't want to have, and we're dealing with men. Women's a whole other story. Most women are not candidates for surgery at all. But ideally, a man would want to wait until maybe he's around your age to even consider surgery and see how far he's progressed by the time he's 40, 45. Um, it will give a physician a kind of a much better overall general idea of where they may progress in the future. there's also something called miniaturization mapping, where they can go in with magnification, basically kind of like a densitometer or a dermatoscope type of a digital microscope, and they can measure what percentage of your hair is miniaturizing, and what hair is kind of the best hair to use. And most of these clinics you see overseas don't do that. But it's always better to wait as long as you can for surgery, because even if the surgery is conservative or appropriate, I should say, just having a little bit more hair can make a big difference in a person's appearance. When someone decides to have surgery at 22, they're thinking about their old hairline, what they had just a few years ago, and they're trying to recapture that look. That's where people get into trouble. So to kind of answer your question, it's always better to wait as long as you can, but that's not what's happening today.
Hmm.
And that's for two reasons. One, there's a lower barrier to entry. Now, consumers are able to get a hair transplant for $1,500 in Turkey, where, 15 years ago, if you didn't have 15 grand, you weren't having surgery. So that kind of put the roadblock on most younger guys because they didn't have the money. So I think that was, yeah, while it's great to be able to have a procedure that's less expensive and have those options, I think there's a reasonable argument for it being, well priced, and that can kind of keep some of the younger guys who are really just really emotional about it from jumping into surgery too early. So to answer your question, it's better to wait as long as you can, but you don't have to wait until you've, completed your baldness cycle. And to answer your second question, or to, gotten to full progression, to answer your second question, there are medications that work. I mean, I've been on a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor for 30 years. I do not have a completely full head of hair. I comb it over. I have like a Trump the early years type of thing. But for the most part, I've saved, I don't know, 75% of my hair. I started to bald at 21.
Hmm.
So drugs like finasteride, which is brand name Propecia, excuse me, I take Proscar, which is a 5 milligram dose. I take name brand. Um, and all the drugs that you see that are being marketed now, through subscription and online that have these drugs. Oral minoxidil is another one. I am not advocating for people to jump on medication because this is for the long haul. Once you start, if you want your hair, you're on it for life. There is a potential for adverse side effects with every medication. Based on my experience of 30 years and having access to physicians who prescribe this to thousands of patients, what you see online is absolutely blown out of proportion compared to the reality of what physicians see in clinic as far as adverse side effects. But it doesn't mean that they can't happen. And I've
Hmm.
seen them happen. So it's real. But you can stop the progression of your hair loss or slow it for decades if you respond well to medication. I'm an example of that. But when people ask me about my hair, I'm like, look, it's a quasi sham, but I'm almost 60. What am I going to do? I feel very fortunate that I was able to stop it for the most part when I was about 29 years old.
Hmm.
And that's that's not kind of, but that's why I do what I do. That was what set the spark in me I realized the industry was a mess. Everyone wanted to try to transplant me or rip me off. I had a lot of hair, even though it was receding and I was balding in the back. Still have a lot of hair. And guys were willing to transplant me in the late 80s. I would have been destroyed, you know? So anyway, again, I provide long answers. Do what you want with, with your editing, but it's important that people kind of understand all of it. When you see these interviews, physicians or other people do podcasts, they're used to giving very short, pithy answers.
Hmm.
The reason they do that, in the end, they have something to sell. Even if they're good guys, they have to omit a lot of things. Even though they're trying to give you the basics, no one's getting the truth.
Yeah. Have you noticed any side effects from taking those medications for so long for you personally?
I haven't, noticed it. I've been very fortunate. And I actually, for me, it's possible that it's the way that I take care of myself as well. I've been a person where, they say it's not great, but I've always gotten I live in California. I've gotten a lot of sunshine. I've exercised most of my life. Like you, even before I understood what grass-fed, grass-finished was and all the different, I was ordering meat from a regenerative farm 20 years ago. Um, Really, it was based on price. So I had a big freezer, and I was like, this
Hmm.
is pretty cheap, but, in the end, we're finding out that, eating meat, eating eggs, and doing the things that I think that you're probably doing gives you a certain longevity and strength cycle. And I think it's probably helped my hormones as well. So I don't know if if that's why I had no adverse side effects, but I don't think it hurts.
Have you heard, I heard some people also recommending like colostrum, the supplement
Yeah.
for hair maintenance. Do you know how effective that is at all?
You know what? I can tell you that based on my experience, there's really no strong data. Let's put it that way. It's very easy to get published today in today's world.
Hmm.
Small publications need content. Um, I mean, I've been published. Besides being published by, my books, I can get my name on a paper, and I'm not even a doctor. So, you're going to see some studies, small studies. Companies are going to leverage these studies that may have been supported by maybe a company that they're involved with, that you don't realize there's this conflict, and there's just a lot of misinformation out there. So can it help? I don't know, but the data is just not there. I do believe in natural DHT blockers like saw palmetto, pygeum africanum, stinging nettle. I wrote about them in 1998 in my first book, and uh, a lot of the physicians in the field were not happy with that. They thought that it was kind of like voodoo type of nonsense. But I was like, look, before finasteride was available, this is what I got my hands on. And I felt that it benefited me. And I had no side effects at the time. So I wrote about it. Now everyone's selling these products.
Hmm. I didn't know like stinging nettle had an impact on hair growth. I did experiment with it in the past for testosterone increase and did notice a really good results with that, but I never knew it was meant to stop hair loss at all.
Well,
So
it actually also has an effect, even though it may help you with your testosterone, it may have an effect on lowering dehydrotestosterone, which is interesting because you would think that if it raised your testosterone, that 5-alpha reductase would then, convert it into DHT. But I mean, I don't know. Looking at you, I don't know if you're even susceptible at this point, genetically to hair loss. If you're having hair loss, you look great. Um, but yeah, so I mean, I wrote about it years ago. I definitely believe that if you get the right standardized extracts, you can lower your DHT to a certain degree. For some men, that may benefit them. But as soon as I was able to get my hands on finasteride, because I was progressing quickly, even on these drugs, even though it slowed these herbs, even though it slowed things down, I got my hands on the drug before it was approved, and that's really what changed things for me. So
got it.
it was approved in December of 1997. I wrote my book about it in 2 years prior, and my book I wasn't able to sell it until that drug was approved. So I was taking the drug prior to its approval.
And what's the name? What's the name of that book?
It's The Bald Truth, like name my
The
show.
Ball of Truth. Oh,
The
I like
Bald
that.
Truth, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
And just to let your listeners know, it's outdated. I mean, it's still in print. People still buy it for some reason, and it's great, but it's really more of a history lesson of what was happening
mhm,
27 years ago in the industry. So if you're interested in that, great. But you can get all that information and more online. You don't have to
got
buy.
it. Got it. The finasteride you mentioned, is that like a medication you take or some topical thing you put on your head?
Finasteride is the generic name for Propecia, and it originally came out in a pill form.
Hmm.
And now, because people are so concerned about adverse side effects, a couple of enterprising physicians started to compound the medication topically. And now everyone's selling topical finasteride concoctions online. If you go through your feed, since you looked me up, you probably see more hair loss ads. You're going to see all these ads in your feed for topical minoxidil, combination of topical minoxidil and topical finasteride with dutasteride. Companies like Keeps and Hims are, they're compounding these medications. But the reality is, when you're dealing with a compounded medication, first of all, there's not enough data showing that it works for like long term.
Hmm.
When you compound these medications, the FDA is really not involved in the compounding process. There's really no, I mean, there are companies out there that are combining 5 different medications. We have no idea how it's going to react with people. So, again, another long answer, but I just think it's important when we talk about these things, and I hear people being interviewed, they just never mention the reality. They're like, yeah, these are the medications. This is what you take. This is what works. This is what doesn't. But not every finasteride is created equal.
Hmm. I think it's like, I don't know if you know that famous book, uh, Animal Farm.
Sure.
You know, the saying, in order to get the sheep to follow, the pigs have to dumb down their message and say like, oh, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good. And they kept
Absolutely.
chanting that, and that's, I find, the only way to go viral online too, just to kind of like keep everything simple, stupid.
Well, that's a
And
great reference, actually, because,
yeah,
and what you just said about online, I was just putting up, I'm sorry if I interrupted you.
no, no, it's okay.
I, I was just kind of putting up, I do a stream on somebody else's channel. I essentially retired in 2009. I was on the radio for 11 years. And, once, I don't, where are you located, by the way?
I live outside of Austin, but right now I'm visiting my parents in Vegas.
Okay, cool. Um, I was thinking about getting a place in Vegas, but, um, so I was on the radio for a long time, and then once here in Los Angeles, and my main stations, they were FM talk stations, Howard Stern stations. They all went under when Howard Stern went over to Sirius XM. So I had a decision to make. I was like, maybe it's time for the show was doing really well. It was a weekend program, but do I still want to do this hustle? And not that it was a big deal, but you had to kind of like find new sponsors, and then there were sponsors that wanted to sponsor the show that I couldn't take on. So I had the opportunity to go to XM, which I did, and that was right before the merge. They still had XM and Sirius. I did that for about a year, and it was okay. But I was like, you know what? I'm fine. I think I'm gonna retire. I was young, relatively young, and I want to kind of live my life when I was young, travel, had a wife at the time, stuff like that. I'm trying to think of why I'm going on this tangent. Remind me what you just said. I had there was something to this.
Um, shoot, I forgot too.
It's okay.
I do this all the time on podcasts myself as well,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, well, no,
like,
it's just it's life, man. It's the way that it is. Jesus, why was I talking?
yeah.
Okay, so I
I know it's
retired.
something important and catchy, but I totally spaced out on it too.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. So I do these streams on Friday, and I decided not to even build my own channel. But I still wanted whoever would find these streams, if it's 1,000 people, 2,000 people, their trajectory of their lives have changed. So I still felt I was doing some good. I had the organizations, my income is essentially set. So I don't have to go online to make a living. I was just throwing up some stuff on Instagram from the shows, and it wasn't hitting. I didn't understand why. I was like, this is good information. And then I met this young person, 19 years old, and I said, take a look at my Instagram, tell me what I'm doing wrong. And she essentially told me, you're giving people too much information. No one wants to sit there and listen to, get an education. They want to see something pithy, short,
mhm.
simple, dumb it down. As soon as I did that, my Instagram went from like 19,000 to well over 100,000 in like weeks.
Yeah.
What you're saying is true. Sadly, what consumers, young consumers especially, are getting is the actual dumbed down version of everything.
Hmm.
And when it comes to this hair loss world, people are making lifelong disastrous decisions that will affect the trajectory of their lives, of their families' lives. And no one really thinks about that when you think about hair loss or getting hair loss surgery.
Yeah. And you see it everywhere. I mean, obviously, like anabolic abuse is very common in the health and fitness industry, or just medical drug use. And
Yeah.
again, they get these little kind of snippets with some random study that doesn't even apply to clinical settings. And they're like, oh, see, scientifically proven. I'm gonna go
Absolutely.
try this right now. It's like, no, man, there's so much variance, even in detailed meta-analysis. There's so much variance from study to study. And even if you put the microscope on each individual study, there's so much variance from subject to subject, and you need a very experienced person, kind of like you said in the beginning, to be able to understand the nuance and where
Right.
you fit into the spectrum and what's going to be the best possible option for you. But yeah, I totally.
But
We're talking about Animal Farm and how you
yeah,
need to
yeah,
dumb down the message to rewind back to what we forgot about, but you kind of remember too. So.
yeah. But I mean, your point is really well taken. And you know, th- even hate saying this because I don't like to dehumanize people online, but the vast majority of health influencers, once they cross over into my space, I'm like, holy cow. I mean, then you really look at them with a jaundiced eye because
Hmm.
what they're providing, based on my expertise, is nonsense,
Hmm.
lies, complete inaccuracies, you know? And I'm talking about guys like, and I hope I can mention names and, if you're comfortable with that, but, you know, people that I like or admire. I won't even mention their names, but big names, big names.
Hmm.
They come into the space and it's like I had one guy on my stream, huge biohacker. He ended up getting a hair transplant. He refuses to take finasteride because, in his mind, he had stated publicly that the drug permanently neuters up to 5% of men who take it.
Hmm.
That is not only untrue. I mean, that's alarmist information. There are thousands of people who are either considering taking it or need to take it because they've had surgery, and they're not going to take it based on that fear mongering. Come to find out, he's selling his own product.
Hmm.
And that's just the reality of what people see today. So if you see a doctor online, no matter how well intentioned, if they're still working or if they're attached to something, at the very least, best case scenario, they're omitting some of the truth.
Yeah. And again, for listeners, I would highly recommend to take into consideration, even if you do find, which is rare, kind of like Spencer mentioned, even if you do find a credible person in a field, just know that they never met you personally. And that thorough assessment when they get to know your situation in detail is where you get the answer that's going to work well for you long term, or have like a higher probability of working well for you long term, rather. So keep that in mind. I know everyone wants quick fixes, and I know it's annoying to do your due diligence sometimes and really do the thorough research. But if you want a good outcome, it just needs to be done in all facets of life. When you're getting financial advice or health advice or hair transplant advice, whatever. It's just what needs to be done. If you don't do that, then you're taking like a huge, huge unnecessary like financial risk and maybe a risk to your health as well, et cetera, et
A
cetera.
100%, brother. I mean, and you look like you are like a fitness guy, obviously, and you probably know a lot about TRT and this how that's being sold to the world and to men. There are guys my age who they think they need to be on TRT.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm not saying that it's a terrible thing, but not all TRT is created equal. Not all physicians who provide TRT are created equal. Um, a large majority of men who have the genetics for hair loss, it's a razor's edge. I've known guys who are 50 and they didn't lose a lot of hair, but as soon as they started a TRT protocol, and then they were also putting like DHEA and other things. DHEA, right? Yeah, DHEA. Um, I mean, they were panicked. They were losing, like they were just dumping hair,
Hmm.
and that's not really told to these guys. You know, I would love to be on TRT. I make sure I do my best to keep my natural testosterone levels as high as possible for my age. That includes sleep, eating right. I I mean, I'll get drunk once in a while, but it's rare. Once or twice a year. For the most part, I don't drink alcohol anymore. Um, I'm pretty strong. I've been able to maintain a lean, kind of relatively muscular build compared to people who don't take care of themselves. So I think, you know, it's important for people to know, especially who are interested in TRT. If you're dealing with hair loss, TRT is a razor's edge, and no one tells you about that.
Hmm.
Doctors sell it, and they prescribe it like candy now. There's clinics everywhere here in Los Angeles. I'm sure you have a lot of experience. You know, you've probably researched it a lot, but no one really talks about the hair loss aspect of it, or maybe they do to some degree, but it's pretty prevalent.
Yeah, or the fact that you can bring your levels up to what they're legally allowed to bring it up to in TRT just naturally, even into your 60s. Of course, it takes a tremendous amount of life modifications, you know, and dedication to living a sustainable lifestyle. But a lot of times it's like people are just like anything, using it to overcome deficits. You know,
Yeah.
they're not sleeping well, they're overweight, not eating well, very stressed out, have bad relationships at home, tremendous amount of micro stressors. And instead of like fixing all that, which will increase your numbers a tremendous amount and maybe doing a few other things, they're like, oh, I just need TRT, you know? I'm like, no, man, you
Yeah.
need to fix all of that
Yeah.
first. And it may take many years, but on top of increasing your testosterone, you're also going to look better. You're going to feel way better. And it's not going to feel like you have like a knife through your throat every day you wake up in the morning because you're drowning in stress all the time, you know?
Yeah. I mean, stress is a difficult thing to remove yourself from, but I do think there's obviously ways to manage it. And a major way I'm sure you promote is, I mean, if I don't exercise every day, some form of exercise,
Yeah.
like I'm a different person if I don't do that. If I don't get that workout done, that could just be running in place for 20 minutes if that's all I have time for. But it makes all the difference in the world. And it also makes a difference. We're talking about hair. There's no doubt that it people's hair loss will progress faster if they're out of shape, if they have low vitamin D levels, and that's been proven recently. There's a couple of recent papers, one by someone that I know very well, that really showed that increasing your vitamin D levels, getting into a maybe a 50 or 60, um, reversed hair loss in those who had
Hmm.
extremely low vitamin D levels, and that was never talked about until recently.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you if sun exposure helped increase or helped improve hair growth because I've heard that in a few circles, but that's interesting
That's a
to hear that.
double-edged sword because the UV light, if it's too much, especially if you have thinner hair, it could actually basically age your hair follicles, age your
Hmm.
hair to some degree. So it has to be an even balance. You don't want to sit out there and lay out, for an hour and a half. But I do think that sun exposure is important. It just has to be done, you know, uh, just you have to be careful, really time yourself, you know.
Mhm. Do you know if any of those kind of like things that increase blood circulation to the scalp, like dermal rollers or just like a scalp massager, do those things help at all?
If you ever cut the top of your scalp, the baldest guy, if you ever see anybody get a cut in their scalp, how much they bleed?
I
They
don't.
bleed a lot. It's
Okay.
profuse. And I can say that the blood supply theory is one of the biggest money grabs in the hair loss industry.
Hmm.
So, um, can derma rolling help? Yeah, I mean, it could bring growth factors. It could help with, laying new collagen down. It may help to stimulate initial hair growth, kind of like minoxidil can to some degree. But if you continue to derma roll in the end, especially these young guys, I see them doing it every day for years, you are causing, no matter what they say, no matter how small those needles are, you are causing long-term microscarring and kind of fibrotic tissue to be laid down. You don't want to do that. So I think if someone's going to derma roll, it's got to be done, you know, maybe they want to do it once or twice a month. You never put on, you'll see these things where guys are putting products that have SD alcohol on their scalp, like minoxidil products, right after they derma roll. What does SD alcohol do when you put it on abraded skin? It kills skin cells. So if you go to a hospital, no one's going to put alcohol in your wound because it kills your skin.
Hmm.
They may have done that 25 years ago, but now they know better. So I'm not a big fan of derma rolling. I've seen it help some people get initial growth at young ages, but they don't need to continue. Once they kind of pop that hair out, if that's helped them, lay off of it and never put any topicals on after you derma roll.
And that applies with the scalp massager too, right? Same kind of
Yeah, I
concept.
mean, I think, listen, if it makes you feel better to massage your scalp, massage your scalp. I mean, but it's not going to grow your hair. And there are some professionals out there that may recommend scalp massagers, but they're usually selling them.
Hmm. I
So,
notice all professionals are usually selling whatever they're supporting, whatever they have like a myriad of studies to support on their podcast, John, you know?
100%. Listen, not at the risk of sounding obnoxious, I could sell anything. I founded the American Hair Loss Association. All we have to do is slap a seal on that, create a product, and it's going to be the only product in the category that has that, like
Hmm.
the American Dental Association, except they put it on multiple products. I've chosen not to do that. I've chosen not to take any equity in any companies. Now we have right now one trusted brand, and we started a trusted brand, category because it's so ugly out there. But everyone wants to be a trusted brand, and everyone wants me to go into business with them, and I can't take equity in the business. So, and maybe that's because I'm in a position where I don't have to. I don't know. I mean, I've always kind of been that way though, since I was young and I started in this. That's how I wanted to kind of build my brand, so to speak, by kind of just finding out a way to earn money by telling the truth.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's why I tell people, they got to be careful. It's so easy. I mean, I have shower head companies. I could be an extra 7 figures a year if I decide to work with them. Yeah, I use a filtered shower head. Great. Go buy yourself a filtered shower head, you know, but it's not going to grow your hair back.
Hmm. Do you feel like I personally I don't use any kind of face washes or anything of that sort. I just use goat milk shampoo or not shampoo, but soap. And
Yeah.
I avoid using shampoo altogether. What's your take on shampoo? A lot of people say like avoid it. I do read a lot of the labels and there's like a tremendous amount of chemicals in a lot of the products.
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, the sulfide thing about, causing hair loss, total myth.
mhm,
These are for companies who originally it started with certain brands of products that were geared towards hair loss. And then everyone was saying that it causes hair loss. Does not. Everyone would be bald. However, I use relatively clean shampoos myself. Um, and this is going to sound weird, but I don't even put soap on my face at
mhm.
all. I use,
I don't either, actually.
yeah, filtered water. I don't put any creams, any of that stuff. And I'm certainly not saying I look 21, but I can say that I think that in the long run, all those products could potentially age people faster,
Hmm.
you know, especially the products that create a mechanism where your base is plumped up and then it shrinks and it's plumped and then it shrinks. And, people put it on, they look great, hyaluronic acid products and all this stuff. And all the dermatologists and influencers talk about the products they use. In the end, they're all screwed up. These are also the same
Hmm.
people that are injecting fillers into people's faces.
Hmm.
So to answer your question, you got to keep your hair clean. That is really important. Anyone who claims not to wash, they subscribe to not wash your hair daily or every other day, whatever it is. That's not good if you are dealing with hair loss. You want to keep the scalp clean. It actually will remove some DHT, some degree, if you keep your scalp clean. Um, so, but yeah, I use clean shampoos, as clean as possible. Not goat milk, but you know,
I
clean
try to
stuff that
keep
I
it
can find.
traditional like my grandmother, so I
Yeah.
never transitioned past that. But
Well, you
yeah,
certainly look a lot younger than your age, and your hair looks great. And so whatever you're doing, you're doing a great job for yourself. And I think a lot of it has to do with what you're eating, for
yeah.
sure.
I think especially with skincare, I feel, and stress management and your quality of sleep. I feel if you just mastered those three variables, your skin would look great.
Yeah,
Um, well, have you ever heard of like copper peptides?
sure.
What
Sure.
what's your take on them?
Listen, these are products that have been around since I started in the industry. When I wrote my first book, there were a couple of brands of copper peptides that were being studied that I wrote about. And all I can say is in this industry, what's old is what's new. And there's absolutely zero evidence, long-term data, that copper peptides help in the cessation of hair loss or regrowing hair. Now, I don't know if they help your skin in some way. I am a believer in peptides to some degree, but the topical copper peptides that are being pimped out and sold online for hair loss, in my view, it's a waste of people's money, and they're just old products that are being repackaged.
Hmm.
I mean, this is 30 years ago I'm talking about. And it was all over the internet then, which was like basically very small. But everybody was selling it. Every hair transplant surgeon was selling it, every dermatologist, and then it just stopped, went out of vogue. And last 5 years or so, it's kind of back.
Yeah. Okay. And how about like PRP or stem cell injections? Are those kind of the same category of just it may
No,
work for a very small minute of people, but usually it just doesn't work for most people?
well, here's the thing. Not all PRP is created equal. People think they're going to go to a med spa or the back of a plastic surgeon's office. They're offering PRP. But again, that's a very nuanced situation as well. Most people offering PRP, even physicians, they're not actually measuring your platelets. They're not measuring the platelet when they're not measuring the platelets when they draw your blood. They're not using any type of measurements when they actually prepare their PRP. They may be using open kits as opposed to closed kits. The kits that they're buying, half of the kits being sold out there aren't even providing sterile test tubes. I mean, as crazy as that sounds, most people in the United States, at least, are not getting real PRP. They may be getting platelet neutral plasma re-injected into their scalp or even platelet poor plasma. Now, for those who are lucky enough to find a practitioner that is really taking the measurements and kind of understands what the parameters are, I've seen PRP work really well for some people.
Hmm.
It's expensive, it's an ongoing process, but as long as it's working for you, people are willing to pay for it. Sad part is today it's being sold in packages at med spas or by dermatologists. And just like you asked me the question, like it's like PRP is one thing. You may know this as well, but it's not one thing, and there's many ways to manufacture that PRP. And most of the ways and the kits that are being sold, they're not providing real PRP. And
Well,
that's,
if sorry, didn't mean to
go
interrupt.
ahead.
Well, if a person, do you do like if a person's interested in getting like credible assessment on which practitioners they need to see and then where to go to, can they contact you
You
for?
know, that's a good question. I've kind of avoided that. What they can do is they can call the live stream, which I actually am doing at 3 o'clock today. And they can find out about that through Instagram, my Instagram, which I guess you can give out. But
Mhm.
I founded the American Hair Loss Association and the International Alliance of Hair Restoration Surgeons. So if they're considering anything inject into their scalp or any type of surgery, they can go to iahrs.org. They can read about it. They can contact physicians. But again, we have no online consultation forms. We do not, I will not sell surgery. Surgery is the last resort. Your listeners have to know that. But these are all professionals. This is all they do. And they can give patients a really good assessment, even online. And I can't vouch for every PRP kit they bring into their office, or if they're going to try to sell somebody a laser cap. My main goal was the surgical process. But if people go in with their eyes wide open, at least they have a fighting chance if they find someone through that organization.
Got it. Okay. Are there any other good references or places people can kind of check out your content that you'd like to share?
Sure. I like to build the Instagram presence because I think, again, we're helping a lot of people through that now. So that's at Spencer Kobren. And you can spell my name for them, or I can. It's Kobren. I do a live stream on something called the Hair Transplant Channel. It's a small channel. The guy that owns it and runs it is Joe Tillman. He's like the original hair transplant mentor. He's a guy who's a repair patient who's helped a lot of people. He's been in the industry for a long time. Doesn't sell anything. So you can look up The Bald Truth on YouTube and you can find the stream. And you can go to, I guess, thebaldtruth.com, which I mean, I may put up a stream or not, but we're always live on there on Fridays.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you, Spencer. I know you got to go to another live pretty soon. I thank
Yeah.
you for your time, and it's always interesting. And I hope for the people that listen to this will save them a tremendous amount of time and frustration, and they can kind of make a better decision based off the information you provided. It's just kind of
Yeah.
always sad because 99% of people are still going to go like to the clickbait. Okay, like I saw this one quick 10-second video of my
Well,
favorite influencer. He got the hair transplant. Now I'm going to go do it in Turkey too, or whatever.
I have guys fighting me online saying that, I'm negative, you know. Like I'm just trying to I have no skin in the game, brothers. I'm just trying to tell you the truth.
Yeah, anything with health, anything regarding health, I found outside of just like a little paper cut, it's not like easy to fix, especially if it's chronic health issues.
Yeah,
There are myriad of variables to consider, and to make it more complicated, they vary from person to person on top of that, and their circumstance and stuff of that sort. So it's like, I don't know, I think it's like when people don't get that easy solution, they see you as the enemy, you know what I mean?
they
Because you're not
do.
making it easy for them. But I'm like, dude, this is just how life works.
I have
Life is
I
not
have I I have
straightforward
all
like
these
that.
kids, especially young guys, like, why don't you just give us a solution? You keep saying follow me. You keep saying, I'm like, the solution's in the content. Here's the truth. Take this information, do your due diligence. At least you're
Hmm.
armed with the truth. They just want me to tell them how to fix their situation. And sadly, I don't mean to bring your audience down, but you got about a 50-50 chance if you start early to save your hair.
Hmm.
If you use medication like finasteride, you have about close to a 90% chance of slowing the progression if you respond well. When about 90% of the people do. But it doesn't mean you're going to stop your hair loss forever. This is a kind of a chronic manageable disease.
Hmm.
And people need to understand that. Once you cross into the hair loss world, you're never the same. But if you're lucky, you make the right moves early, you could be okay. You really can. But if you make the wrong moves, man, by the time they're your age or my age, forget about it. Time they're my
Right.
age, done.
Maybe they'll have to go full Bruce Willis mode, and just accept it.
Absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that, and before I let you go, I know you have to go too. Um, and I didn't say this, I think shaving your head is really, it solves the problem. If you're equipped to deal with that, that should be your first line of attack.
Hmm.
Don't even think about this stuff because this is all encompassing. This hairstyle that I'm dealing with, it's exhausting, but it is what it is, you
Well, it
know.
looks good. It's
Well,
worth the effort.
I appreciate it, brother. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you contacting me and doing this program. So stay in touch.
No, thank you. Thank you for being on the show. And thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend. Let me just.